This is Chapter 16, Module 2, the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of the autonomic nervous system. The learning objectives of this module are 1. Describe the structures and functions of the sympathetic division. 2. Describe the structures and functions of the parasympathetic division. 3. Discuss the differences in function and structure between the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And 4. Discuss the significance of dual innervation. The autonomic nervous system can be subdivided into the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. There are several differences between these two divisions. These differences include where their motor neurons exit the central nervous system, the length of the preganglionic and postganglionic fibers, what neurotransmitters are used at each synapse, and what effect they have on the body. This segment will describe each of these differences. The sympathetic nervous system originates in the hypothalamus and the medulla oblongata of the brainstem. The initial neurons, called the upper motor neurons, extend to specific areas of the thoracic and lumbar spinal regions. These upper motor neurons synapse on the cell bodies of preganglionic neurons found specifically between the spinal levels of T1 and L2. The preganglionic fibers exit the spinal cord through the ventral roots at these specific spinal levels. Because of this, we also call the sympathetic nervous system the thoracolumbar division of the autonomic nervous system. The preganglionic fibers are very short. They synapse quickly onto the postganglionic cell bodies of the ganglionic neurons, very close to the spinal cord, just outside the intervertebral foramen. The cell bodies of the ganglionic neurons form an area called the ganglion. From the ganglion, the fibers of the ganglionic neuron extend to the target effectors. There are 3 ganglions associated with the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system: the sympathetic chain ganglia, the collateral ganglia, and the adrenal medulla. The sympathetic chain is a chain of ganglions or clusters of cell bodies that is located close to the spinal cord and forms a chain running parallel to the spinal cord just outside of the spine. The ganglionic neurons that extend from the sympathetic chain ganglion synapse on visceral effectors in the thoracic cavity, the head, the body wall, and the limbs. The collateral ganglia are anterior to the vertebral bodies. They contain ganglionic neurons that innervate tissue and organs in the abdominal pelvic cavity. The adrenal medulla acts as a modified ganglia and targets organs and organ systems throughout the body. The ganglionic neuron is very long and will extend to the effectors of the sympathetic nervous system. The effectors of the sympathetic nervous system include the eye, the salivary glands, the heart, the lungs, the liver and gallbladder, the stomach, spleen, pancreas, intestines, adrenal medulla, kidney, urinary bladder, and the penis and scrotum in the male and the uterus and ovary in the female. In the sympathetic nervous system, the neurotransmitter released at all of the ganglionic synapses between the preganglionic neuron and the postganglionic neuron is acetylcholine. However, at the synapse between the ganglionic neuron and the target organ, either epinephrine or norepinephrine is released. The preganglionic fibers of the sympathetic nervous system are myelinated, whereas the postganglionic fibers that they synapse on are unmyelinated. Therefore, the preganglionic fibers of the sympathetic nervous system are short and myelinated, while the postganglionic fibers are long and unmyelinated. The connection to the adrenal medulla is different. The preganglionic neuron is longer and extends from the spinal cord to synapse directly onto the adrenal medulla. The adrenal medulla is the innermost area of the adrenal gland. The neural tissue of the adrenal medulla acts as modified ganglionic neurons. When these axons are stimulated, they cause the adrenal medulla to release neurotransmitters such as epinephrine and norepinephrine into the bloodstream. These neurotransmitters enter the bloodstream to travel to other target tissues. Once in the blood, norepinephrine and epinephrine function as hormones to affect target cells throughout the body. These hormones will cause a sympathetic effect in organs that are not innervated by the sympathetic nervous system directly. Their effects may take longer as the hormones travel through the bloodstream rather than directly from a nerve. The postganglionic fibers of the ganglionic neuron extend throughout the body, traveling long distances to reach their effectors, where they will properly prepare the body for a crisis, producing the fight-or-flight response, especially to increase alertness, muscle awareness, and tissue metabolism. There are 7 responses to increased sympathetic activity. 1. Heightened mental alertness. 2. Increased metabolic activity. 3. Reduced digestive and urinary functions. 4. Energy reserves activated, such as glycogen being broken down into glucose. 5. Increased respiration, including increased rate of respiration and dilation of the respiratory passageways. 6. Increased heart rate and subsequent increased blood pressure. 7. Sweat glands become activated. When the target organs respond, the person undergoing sympathetic activation would observe specific changes in their body. Their heart rate would increase, their pupils would dilate, their digestion would be inhibited, their nasal secretions would be inhibited, their saliva production would be inhibited, the functions of the liver, kidney, and gallbladder would be inhibited, they would start to sweat, their hair would stand on end, they would start to breathe faster, and their muscles would be tensed for action. Sympathetic activation is also necessary for an orgasm to be produced. The parasympathetic division is different in many ways from the sympathetic nervous system. The upper motor neurons of the parasympathetic nervous system also originate in the hypothalamus and medulla oblongata, but they synapse on preganglionic neurons found in the brainstem and sacral segments of the spinal cord. Because of this, we refer to the parasympathetic division as the craniosacral division. The preganglionic fibers extending from the cell bodies are much longer than in the sympathetic nervous system. Therefore, these preganglionic fibers synapse on the postganglionic fibers much closer to their effector organs. The preganglionic axons that exit the brainstem will do so through cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10. And they exit the spinal cord through spinal nerves S2 to S4. Most of the parasympathetic nerve impulses, 75% that is, travel through cranial nerve 10, which is called the vagus nerve. The preganglionic neurons are longer for the parasympathetic nervous system than they are for the sympathetic nervous system. These preganglionic neurons synapse on the postganglionic neurons much closer to the target organs. The neurotransmitter released at the parasympathetic ganglions and the effectors is always acetylcholine. Therefore, all synapses of the parasympathetic nervous system are cholinergic. The parasympathetic division stimulates visceral activities, conserving energy by storing glucose as glycogen and promoting sedentary activities. There are 5 responses to increased parasympathetic activity. 1. Decreased metabolic rate. That is, glycogen will not be broken down into glucose. 2. Decreased heart rate and blood pressure. 3. Increased secretion by the salivary and digestive glands. 4. Increased motility and blood flow to the smooth muscles and glands of the digestive tract. 5. Stimulation of urination and defecation. When the parasympathetic nervous system is activated, a person will observe several changes in their body. Their heart rate will slow down. Their pupils will constrict. They will start to digest the food they've just eaten. Nasal secretions will start, causing their nose to run. Their liver, bladder, and kidneys will be stimulated. Their lungs will constrict, causing decreased respiration. And also, the parasympathetic nervous system is important for sexual arousal. The target organs for the parasympathetic nervous system are largely the same organs as for the sympathetic nervous system. However, there are some target organs that are only innervated by the sympathetic nervous system. These are blood vessels of the skin, the erector pili muscles, the sweat glands, adipose tissue, and the adrenal medulla. In summary, the big differences between the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system are as follows. 1. The sympathetic nervous system originates in the spinal cord between T1 and L2 and is called the thoracolumbar division, whereas the parasympathetic nervous system originates in cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10, and sacral nerves 2 through 4, and is called the craniosacral division. 75% of all parasympathetic instruction will travel through cranial nerve 10, the vagus nerve. Number 2. The sympathetic nervous system has short preganglionic neurons and long postganglionic neurons. The one exception is the adrenal medulla, where the preganglionic neuron is long and there really are no postganglionic neurons. Instead, the adrenal medulla itself acts as modified postganglionic neurons. In contrast, the parasympathetic nervous system has long preganglionic neurons and short postganglionic neurons. Number 3. The sympathetic nervous system is also called the fight or flight nervous system and centers on increasing alertness, elevating muscle tone, and mobilizing energy. Whereas the parasympathetic nervous system is also called the rest and digest nervous system and centers on relaxation, food processing, and absorbing nutrients for energy. 4. The effects of activating the sympathetic nervous system are brain stimulation, or feelings of euphoria and increased alertness, dilation of pupils, dry mouth or inhibition of the salivary glands, increased heart rate and contraction, increased rate of respiration, inhibition of activity in the liver, gallbladder, small and large intestines, stomach, and kidney, stimulation of the adrenal medulla to release norepinephrine and epinephrine, which is collectively known as adrenaline, inhibition of the urinary bladder, and stimulation of the male and female reproductive tracts for ejaculation. In contrast, the effects of activation of the parasympathetic nervous system include brain inhibition, sleepiness and grogginess, constriction of the pupils, increased secretions of digestive enzymes and increased secretions of salivary glands, stomach glands, intestinal glands, pancreas and liver, promotes absorption of nutrients from the foods you just ate, increases motility of smooth muscle contractions of the digestive tract, stimulates defecation, contracts urinary bladder for urination, constricts respiratory passageways for slower breathing, and reduces heart rate and force of heart contractions. The effects of the parasympathetic nervous system are very short-lived. 5. The neurotransmitter released at the sympathetic ganglia are always ACH. Therefore, the ganglionic synapses are always cholinergic. The neurotransmitters released at the sympathetic effectors are norepinephrine and epinephrine, or both. In contrast, the neurotransmitter released at the parasympathetic ganglions and the effectors is always acetylcholine. Therefore, all synapses of the parasympathetic nervous system are cholinergic. And 6. Most vital organs receive both sympathetic and parasympathetic instructions. This is called dual innervation. The organs and tissues that only receive sympathetic instruction are the blood vessels of the skin, the erector pili muscles, the sweat glands, the adipose tissue, and the adrenal medulla. The effects of sympathetic activation to these tissues include increased blood to the skin, an activation of the sweat glands leading to sweating, release of fats from the adipose tissue, and the release of adrenaline from the adrenal medulla. This ends Chapter 16, Module 2, the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of the autonomic nervous system.